We are now just 2 more sleeps away from the start of the NHL regular season, and we're still not 100% sure what the Preds roster is going to look like. We'll break that down. Plus, a look at the first couple episodes of Behind the Glass, the NHL Network show featuring the Nashville Predators training camp. We'll get into it today on the Locked On Predators podcast.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen every single day. We are free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe if you're watching us this morning. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at ontheforecheck.com, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Ann Kimmel. I am a writer and editor at InsideThePreds.com.
We are getting close, Ann.
So close.
The countdown is on.
It's just right there.
It's right there. 2 more days. Well, I guess 3 if you count today, but I don't know. It's weird how how many days until things.
I know.
Work
I never know. And that and this and next week. This week or next week. It's all very confusing.
Or not this weekend, but this coming weekend. It's like, isn't this weekend like this coming weekend?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a whole
It's
thing.
all the same.
Yeah. Hey, Nashville Predators. They're in Prague. They're playing the San Jose Sharks in a doubleheader this weekend to kick off the NHL's Global Series. These 2 games, despite being overseas, are regular season games. So big things to talk about. Of course, the big thing is the Predators have a little bit of a heads up over other NHL teams. They have 27 players instead of the traditional 23-man roster. That will have to be trimmed down after the Preds get back from Prague. But yeah, the big intriguing thing, Ann, is, we kind of went into this preseason thinking that, the rosters, after the first couple weeks of camp, after the first preseason game or so, it looks like the roster's probably set. Maybe this just the bottom line is the one big caveat. Now, over the past couple games, we've kind of seen the John Hynes just throw the depth chart out and kind of reshuffle things a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit unexpected because with the Global Series in Prague, the Predators have this condensed preseason. So they have fewer preseason games, shorter training camp. And so you kind of, I went into this thinking, okay, this is going to be any muddy water is going to be much clearer pretty quickly because they just don't have time. But these players have come in and made John Hynes's decisions really difficult. And they've continued to do that. And I think he's continued to use preseason games and the game in Bern as a chance to try some different people out, to get an extra look at somebody. And all they do is keep performing well. So we're not any closer. I don't feel like we're any closer to a definitive roster necessarily in our minds than we were when camp started. And again, it's not because of the condensed time. It's because these players came in and they were ready to compete, which is, it's a great problem to have.
Yeah. And you look and you kind of get the feeling that maybe these 2 games, even though they're regular season, maybe more of an extension of the preseason a little bit. You kind of figure maybe, hey, they're going to go with one combination in game 1 and then go with, kind of a completely new set in game 2. Obviously, you're going to get your, UC Saros, and you're going to get your Philip Forsbergs and Mikael Granlunds, and Roman Yossi's probably playing both games. But, this is probably more of a chance for Hynes to kind of figure out those last couple spots that still need to be plugged. We still don't really know who's going to be the other second line winger next to Ryan Johansen and Nino Niederreiter, and we still have absolutely zero idea what John Hynes is going to go for the 4th line. We think we know which way he's leaning, but there's that. And then, on defense, the top 5 are set, but who's going to play with Dante Fabro? Is it going to be Mark Borowiecki? Is it going to be Jeremy Lauzon? So there's still, for a roster that feels like a lot of like the big pieces are mostly set, there are still a lot of holes.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of holes considering that the regular season starts in 2/3 days, whichever one that is. I mean, I can't think of a time when it felt like there were this many possibilities still in the opening day roster for the Nashville Predators. I don't remember a time where it had this many still potential players. And I don't think that's necessarily just because of the expanded roster. I think there's just that many players that are competing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird preseason in a
Let's
good
go to
way,
the
but it's weird.
Let's go to the second line,
Mhm.
because we thought, the big combination they were putting together was Phil Tomasino with Ryan Johansen, Nino
Mhm.
Niederreiter. We know we talked about this a little bit. That seemed to be the line that was together all through camp. They were together the first couple preseason games, and then over the past, like the last week or so, John Hines has shuffled it around. He's put Kiefer Sherwood up there, and that line played together and burned to. Um, kind of, pretty good reviews. Like,
Mhm.
not bad. Like
Yeah.
Ryan Johansen, Nino Niederreiter, clearly going to be the spark plug at that line, whoever the other person on there is. And Phil Tomasino is a healthy scratch. I know people were reading a lot into that, like,
Yeah.
oh well, that says a lot. And I think it was just an opportunity to get Sherwood some more time up front as an audition, but I don't know, man. Like, what are your thoughts on that whole on that second line and who we might see there?
I really do think that John Hines is going to slot Phil Tomasino in there for at least the beginning of the season with Johansson and Niederreiter. I really do, and I think him being a healthy scratch, I feel like I'm more of the camp that this he just needs another spot to continue to see some people like Kiefer Sherwood because the fourth line is kind of an open, it's kind of a blank slate, and you've got more than three guys in different combinations that John Hines is probably seriously looking at. So for me, I think that Phil Tomasino will start on the second line. What I saw of them in training camp, I really liked. You don't necessarily look at the three of them like Nino and Ryan Johansson. They're a very specific size, they're a very specific shape, they play a very specific kind of physicality. And I do think that Tomasino's a little bit of an anomaly from that, but I think it really worked when I saw it in preseason. And I think as far as game intelligence and pace of game, he can definitely keep up. So I would be surprised if Tomasino's not there.
Well, but the thing is, why would they spend the last week putting Kiefer Sherwood with them for two straight games? If that's the line, wouldn't that if Phil Tomasino was going to be their line mates, why wouldn't you kind of keep that momentum going for the rest of the regular season like you've done with every other line so far in preseason? And that to me is the question mark, Ann, because we mentioned this on the show a little bit last week. Phil Tomasino has kind of had a very hit or miss preseason. And it kind of seemed like maybe John Hines was auditioning some other people. There's still a battle there. And I'm not saying Phil Tomasino has been bad because, like you said, that
Right.
line has had a lot of chemistry. It just seems like maybe there's just a step off between chemistry. So, that to me kind of signals that maybe this isn't set. That maybe John Hines is trying to find some different pieces to put there. And again, Phil Tomasino may very well start on the
Yeah.
second line, like you said, like that could be the plan all along. To me, it wouldn't be a surprise, like you said, to
Yeah.
go in another direction.
Hmm. I just don't see how Phil Tomasino is going to get fourth line minutes this coming season. I just really don't feel like they see that as a long-term role for him. I just don't see him as a bottom six guy for the Nashville Predators. So that's why I really feel like they've used that second line as kind of a try things out. And honestly, your first line is set. Your
Mm.
third line is set. So the line that you can kind of experiment with a little bit and not affect, absolute chemistry that's been successful for at least one full season is that second line, which is why I think probably you're seeing Sherwood in the second line. Not necessarily, and look, huge Kiefer Sherwood fan. If Kiefer Sherwood got to play on the second line, big fan. And I think he's done well with it. That's why I just really think this is the easiest slot to try out someone else in. But again, who knows? What are you doing? John Hines, love you. What are you doing here, friend? Heads up.
Yeah, gonna be interesting for sure. Fourth line, because maybe that has an implication on what we're talking about. And I also kind of want to make a point on Tomasino to piggyback off what you said in a second. But first, I want to take a second to mention today's show brought to you by our friends at Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information. They got everything you need from live betting to up-to-the-minute scores for whichever game you got a little bit of money on. They also just put out a bunch of stuff, a bunch of futures and over-unders for the NHL season. So make sure you're going out there and seeing where your team ranks. Hey, maybe if you think your over-under is a little bit low, maybe you want to put an over on the Preds, maybe topping 98 points this season. There's other sports involved as well. Everything from this year's MLB playoffs, MMA, boxing, golf, pro and college football, NBA season right around the corner. So there's something for everyone. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action happening right now. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Ann, let's go back to the discussion on the lines here for the Nashville Predators. You hit on something that you said you don't think Phil Tomasino is a fit for the fourth line, which he was last year. I mean, let me rephrase that. He wasn't necessarily a fit for the fourth line last year, but he was on the fourth line, and he did very, very well with what he was given. As we mentioned many times, made Michael McCarron and Matt Luff look like dangerous playmakers at some point with his play. There is a combination where he could fit in, and that is, it seems to be that maybe this is a little bit of a hint on which way John Hines is leaning. He has put Cody Glass and Eeli Tolvanen together a lot this preseason, and especially in the games, those two have looked really well together. So, like, maybe you want Kiefer Sherwood on that second line. Maybe you want Zach Sanford there. Phil Tomasino with Cody Glass and Eeli Tolvanen. We've seen that before. We saw that combination last year, and they put out some very good, exciting hockey.
Yeah. When you say that combination, I think, because then, and you had mentioned this on a previous show, and I've just been chewing on it in my mind. And I think, you're definitely perhaps onto something. I don't know why you're not coaching in the NHL, but I love the idea of like a 3A, 3B line, because if you did put together for a quote unquote fourth line, you put together Tomasino, Tolvanen, and Cody Glass, you have a very offensively minded line together, but you also have, and again, we've talked about this, Eeli Tolvanen, bless him, can't find the back of the net with a treasure map, but by dang, he does everything else so well. He plays so well. And so I could see that being a line that instead of your kind of prototypical fourth line bangers, they're going to come out and they're going to be an offensively minded line. And look, when you have Tanner Jeannot and Yakov Trenin on the ice together, you have, a shutdown line, you have a physical line. So I can see if you put that trio together, I can see somebody else maybe being in on the second line, not necessarily because Phil Tomasino isn't ready, but because Phil Tomasino with offensive players like Cody Glass and Eeli Tolvanen, they may be able to create something very different on the fourth line. So I'm not opposed to your suggestion. I'm not opposed to what you're saying. It's about the only scenario in which I would feel comfortable with Phil Tomasino not being on the second line, though. That's about it right there.
I mean, it makes sense to have kind of more of a 3A, 3B because of, 3A, all of a sudden you have another offensive line this time with more of a two-way vibe. We've talked about how Cody Glass and Phil Thomas, or how Ellie Tolvanen and Cody
Yes.
Glass have kind of worked on their 200-foot games over the past year. We know Ellie Tolvanen was one of the best 200-foot players on the Preds last year, at least in terms of a lot of the metrics, as you mentioned, just couldn't find the net. Maybe that's a line that's like, go out there. It's like, you can do what you want, like your bottom, two lines to do, but they also have a little bit more of a scoring punch. Hey, you're facing the Colorado Avalanche. You need to score. You throw that line out there, put some more pressure on some of their depth guys, make them step up, something that didn't really happen in the postseason last year. And then you look at the Herd line. Look, if you want a traditional go out there and just knock everybody's head off kind of line, there's your Herd line. So it's not like you have to make your Herd line. This is like by far the third line, and they're going to be handling all these responsibilities and blah, 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 blah. No, you can put them out when you need them to, but you're not giving them the same expectations that you had for, Nick Bonino, Craig Smith, and Rocco Grimaldi a few years ago, just because they're not all that type of players. So I like that idea. The hitch and the giddy up, to steal your term, is going to be John Hynes. And we talked about this a lot, where he likes his lines to have identities, or not just like the combination of players, but it's like identity in the sense that he wants his first and second lines to play a certain way. He wants to use them in X situations. He wants his third line to play a certain way, and he wants to use them in X situations. For the fourth line, John Hynes, since he's been here, has kind of made that a certain identity, which has been, kind of the grinded out, physical big guy kind of line. And he used them in a certain way in certain scenarios. So that's my question is, does that still his vision? In a perfect world, is that still what his fourth line looks like? Or is he going to change course a little bit and say, you know what? Like, I have a different group of players this year. I have a little bit more depth. I need to reimagine how I'm using my lines. And maybe that opens things up. But if he's going back to what he did last year, all of a sudden you were looking at a completely different list of players who could make this team.
Yes, 100% agree with you. And what's interesting, you're talking about he has a very specific identity that he has wanted for that fourth line. The perfect identity for that fourth line is the third line. You have that line that, you have that line that plays that shutdown, physical, hard hitting, but still with a little offensive punch. I mean, let's not forget that Tanner Jeannot gets some stuff done offensively. Colton Sissons is terrific at that kind of thing. Yakov Trenin, he's going to have another good year, I think, another solid year. So you already have the absolute near perfect fourth line that plays that style of hockey that I think John Hynes has been searching for to go with the Herd line. So I agree with you. Then do you want two of them? Because you could put two of them together. You've got Michael McCarron, you've got Zach Sanford. I mean, you've got Kiefer Sherwood. I mean, you could in theory, but then what are you giving up? And if you don't have Cody Glass on this roster, you're giving up stuff. You're giving up goals. You're giving up points.
Yeah, that is 100% going to be a failure, I think, for John Hynes if Cody Glass isn't on this roster.
People will riot.
Well, I will riot because Cody Glass has proven everything he needs to prove to show he belongs in the NHL. So if that's a thing, if John Hynes does go back to like his traditional kind of, his method where it's like the fourth line and, Michael McCarron and Zach Sanford are that line. And that's no disrespect to them because Michael McCarron and Zach Sanford have each had really good preseason. So is Cole Smith, another guy who is kind of in that mix for one of the last roster spots. And, Sanford, I think especially is somebody that I think is an intriguing option that can play a lot of places. But if you're putting all those guys in there at the expense of somebody like Cody Glass, I think you have to put John Hynes under the microscope then as maybe not adjusting to what he has, maybe being a little stubborn. But again, that's something that we're going to have to determine. And again, I'm curious to see what they do for the lines in these first two games.
Yes.
As we mentioned, they're regular season games, but they might have more like a preseason vibe. Remember, they have 27 guys instead of 23. So yeah, I would expect this. Maybe we don't get firm answers until next week when they take on the Dallas Stars at home for
Yes.
their, North American season opener, back when the
Yes.
rosters are down to 23.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it still feels very up in the air. I think whatever they try in San Jose, whatever lines go out against San Jose in the global series, I don't think those are set in stone. I agree with you. This is just going to be kind of another look at what could be. And I think they're going to get a lot of information from that. And hopefully it's not going to cost them any regular season points. But you know, I want to hit on what you said and just kind of summarize it. You as a parent, you parent the kid you get. You don't parent the kid that you want. You parent the kid you get. And I think John Hines has a very different looking roster. And you got to coach the roster you have. And I think that means you've got to be maybe a little bit flexible in how you're designing it, because this roster right now with these 27 players, there's a lot of options here. So it's going to be interesting to see what he kind of goes with in Prague. I'm very curious to see what he goes with in Prague. And for the love of God, tell us soon, because I can't stand it.
Yeah. Please give
Please.
us a decision on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Just
Um,
confirm Cody Glass, for the love of
yeah.
God.
Well, speaking of Cody Glass, big scene in the new Behind the Glass. There's not just about Cody Glass, despite the name Glass being in there.
Mhm.
There's a lot of
Mhm.
stuff to unpack. That is coming up next on the Locked On Predators podcast. But hey, reminder about tomorrow's show. Of course, we
Oh,
mentioned the
yeah.
Preds are facing the San Jose Sharks. We are going to be chatting with our friends at Locked On Sharks. Anybody who follows the Locked On podcast knows JD is a big personality. Their shows are a lot of fun. So we have something fun planned for this crossover. It is going to probably go off the rails. So you're going to
Oh,
want to tune in
100%.
tomorrow on the Locked On Predators podcast. And hey, while you're doing that, make sure you're just giving the other Locked On NHL channels a follow. If there's a team you're just curious about, see where they are in the offseason, go listen to their channels. And as always, you can listen to Locked On NHL. That's your daily NHL podcast, available free wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Ann, we had the debut of Behind the Glass, NHL
Mhm.
Network's new show, kind of like Hard Knocks, but for Nashville Predators training camp.
Yep.
Yeah, that came out last week. There's another new episode last night. So yeah, it's something.
Oh
It's
my
something to at
goodness.
least keep us engaged until regular season starts.
Yeah, it's been so good. I think, and like, look, this is just full disclosure. I, in general, am a curious person. And so it's really interesting as somebody who follows the team to see the behind the scenes, because like these cameras go in the meetings with John Hines and David Poyle and the coaching staff where they're evaluating players. It goes to the training room. It really shows you what it's like at the Nashville Predators training camp. And so we've learned a lot of things. We also like okay, if you have not seen the show, first of all, go to NHL Network. They have a YouTube page and it'll be there, but it's on NHL Network. You absolutely need to watch it. It really is a fantastic show. It's very well done. And they don't go too heavy on the Nashville country music kitsch, except for the opening this time, which
Yeah.
forgiven. Um, but if you have not been on hockey Twitter, Predators hockey Twitter, then let me just tell you, there is a clip that you need to look for if you have a cry stuck. Like if you've got big feelings, but you can't get them out, you don't need therapy. You need like 38 seconds of the clip of David Poyle telling Cody Glass he's going. Like I literally, my throat burns just talking about it, because it was so amazing. But David Poyle tells Cody Glass in last night's episode, hey, you were going to Europe with us. And the Cody Glass story, like, look, I'm a mom. I can hardly stand to watch this. This kid has been through it. Like he has chased his dream. and it has just been uphill for him a lot of the way. And so you can't help but root for him. And then to see his just relief that this hard work that he's put in is paying off. He got to play in Bern, he's with the team in Prague. Dear God, let him make this opening night roster. Like I just think Nashville has become Cody Glassville. And I appreciate him being willing to be vulnerable about just how hard this has been, because I think it's that athlete thing. You don't want to show vulnerability. You don't want to seem like there might be some sort of perceived weakness or whatever. But Cody Glass has been really open about how difficult this has been and how hard he's had to work. So, oh my gosh, if you want to get a cry unstuck, go watch Cody Glass find out he's going to Europe, because it will destroy you in the best ways.
Yeah. It's
Love
to
him.
that point. I like the line where he's sitting with David Poyle and John Hines, and we know Cody Glass was going to Europe beforehand, so we knew how it turns out. But like the way David Poyle was like, as we know, we've had a lot of tough roster battles, and we know we're going to Europe, and we're gonna bring you with us. And it's like you can see the relief, because you're like Cody Glass, this kind of thing, and it's like, I'm getting sent to freaking Milwaukee, aren't I? Like, I'm doing that again. And then
Yeah.
it's like, do you remember, like, I don't know if you've ever seen The Office or not, but there's a scene where Michael hits Meredith with his car, and he goes into the office, and he's like, everybody have some terrible news. Meredith was hit by a car. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctors did everything they could, and she's going to be okay. And it's like, and everybody's like, why would you say it like that?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like I got
Yeah.
that same vibe, but just the relief on Cody Glass's
Yeah.
face, and it's, you could see like he got a little bit emotional when he was sitting on there like talking, and you could just see like the big thing I took away too was John Hines, who looks more and more every day like an assassin in some Eastern European slasher film. Sitting there like normally just sitting there like cross-armed, not
Mhm.
saying a word, and then but there's this just like grin on his face,
Yes.
like this grin on his face, because you could see how much that it was almost at the faces like John Hines knew Cody deserved it, and he was
Yes.
kind of cheering for Cody Glass to make it. And again, we mentioned this last segment, like maybe he's, kind of what John Hines wants to do. Like maybe he's proven enough that John Hines shuffles the deck a little bit. It'll be interesting to watch, but yeah, that by far was one of the most fun moments. There's a couple other moments. There's one that you got tipped off that's still coming up, because I know that you've been previewing it for InsideThePreds.com. You were given a heads up that the Roman Yossi stuff coming up in next week's episode, when he's back in Switzerland, is going to take whatever you felt for Cody Glass and bump it up to a 100.
Yeah, and you know what? It's gonna be like hard and wonderful to watch, because you could feel it during the game in Bern. You could feel how emotional this was, for not just Roman Yossi, but for Nino Niederreiter, whose grandparents got to see him play for the first time as an NHL player, which I'm like, y'all just stop already with this, because I can't handle this emotional content. But yeah, just seeing Roman Yossi, seeing his parents, being back in this arena that he's played in, that he worked hard. They were saying that he would sell candy bars to get tickets to go to the games in there. He had all the team over to his parents' house. Like it's just, we always, you think of this is a business, and it is a business, and this is a job, and it is a job. But moments like that may be few and far between, especially for a player who comes from overseas. So yes, next week's episode is, if you have any residual cry left, I have a sneaky suspicion it will become unstuck with Roman Yossi getting to go back to Bern. So
Yeah.
fantastic documentary. They I loved the interview last night with Mark Borvietsky, who is one of my all-time favorite athletes, and also we got to see Philip Forsberg groom the mustache.
Yeah.
So people,
Big moment. Big
there's
moment.
no more hard-hitting, tell us something we need to know in Nashville thing going on besides behind the glass, because we have seen Philip Forsberg brush the mustache and apply product, and we're not all, we're all going to be a little bit different from now on, having seen it and know.
Are you worried that it's just kind of pulled the curtain back and now some of the mystery's out, and maybe
Yeah,
this gives other teams the edge?
it's like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Pay no
Yeah,
attention
pay
to
no
the fact
attention to
that
the
he
man with the
doesn't wake
mustache.
up and it looks like that.
Yeah,
But yeah.
he like comes out. He's like the Pringles guy, where it's just there. It's just
That's
there.
right.
Don't question how it got there.
Yep. Flawless 24/7. I
Yeah,
believe that. Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
great show. Great
yeah,
show.
so if you haven't checked it out, you can do so on NHL Network's YouTube page. All the episodes are on there. And again, be sure you keep a lookout for the next episode dropping next week, because there is some good stuff in there. In the meantime, another thing you can do on YouTube is subscribe to the Locked On Predators podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also the bell button. That way you'll be notified whenever we put out new episodes. We're doing these daily now. The NHL regular season is back in business. So whenever we put something new up, whether that's a game reaction or maybe live breaking news about the regular season, you will be the first to know. And if you're listening to this on your audio platforms, remember you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher. Just name a podcasting platform, and chances are we're on there. Just search Locked On Predators. And give yourself a plug for where our fine listeners can find your work.
You can find my work at InsideThePreds.com, and you can always find me on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
I'm Nick Morgan. You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com. Follow me on Twitter at _NSMorgan. Also be sure you're following the podcast at LO_Predators. That is going to do it for today's Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with the Locked On Sharks crossover, getting you ready for the season. See you guys.